Is what hit her like a physical blow. What are you saying, baby? She asked, her voice trembling. You told me you love me, that we had built a life together. How can you say this now? Payback? What are you paying back? What is happening? Please explain to me. I am losing my mind. Let today be the last time you open your mouth to call me baby, Toby snapped, his voice cold and unyielding. Where is your baby? Don't you ever call me that again. It disgusts me when you call me that. Rule number 1, address me by my name, Toby. Rule number 2, stay out of my way. Rule number 3, you will still do your duties as my wife. You will cook, clean, and fulfill your obligations in this house. And when I want to sleep with you, you won't refuse. Do you understand? From now on, you are my wife. You are my slave. And if you ever tell anyone about what happened tonight, I swear I will personally make your life a living hell. Do you understand? Florence's lips quivered as she nodded her head severally. Tears streamed down her face. Yes, Toby, she whispered, her voice breaking. Without another word, Toby stomped out of the room, slamming the door behind him as he went to sleep in the guest room. Left alone, Florence collapsed to the floor, her body shaking with uncontrollable sobs. She clutched her chest, the pain of his words cutting deeper than any wound. Her wedding night, this she had dreamt of for years, had become her worst nightmare. Oh God, she cried, her voice barely audible through her tears. How could this happen? How could he do this to me? I'm finished. Florence cried until she had no strength left, eventually drifting into an uneasy sleep on the cold, rose-strewn floor. The weight of her shattered dreams pressing heavily on her heart. Florence woke up the next morning on the cold hard floor of her marital bedroom, her wedding gown still on. Stained with tears, the memories of the previous night came rushing back, each word Toby had said cutting her deeper than any physical wound cut. She sat up slowly, her head pounding from the tears she had shed. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. Our wedding day had been perfect, or so she thought, until the mask Toby wore slipped, revealing the monster beneath. For hours, she stayed in the room, staring blankly at the ceiling. The thought of facing him again made her stomach churn, but she knew she couldn't avoid him forever. She changed out of her wedding dress, cleaned her face off the smeared makeup, and steeled herself. You have to be strong, Florence, she whispered to herself, though her voice trembled. Downstairs, she found Toby casually eating breakfast, scrolling through his phone as if nothing had happened. The sight of him sitting there, calm and indifferent, made her blood boil. She wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, but she knew better now. His words from last night echoed in her mind. I will personally make your life a living hell. Good morning, she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Toby looked up, his expression cold and dismissive. Morning. Your breakfast is in the kitchen. You will eat, then clean the house. Florence's heart sank. This was a new reality, a life she had willingly walked into, blinded by love and the facade Toby had carefully crafted. She nodded silently and retreated to the kitchen, her appetite non-existent. The tears threatened to spill again, but she swallowed them down. She had to think. Days turned into weeks and Florence endured Toby's cruelty in silence. He was emotionally distant, often coming home late and barely speaking to her. When he did, it was to issue orders or insult. The man she thought she loved had vanished, replaced by someone she barely recognized. She confided in no one, too ashamed to admit the truth. Her parents, friends, and colleagues still believed she was living a fairy tale and she didn't want to shatter their illusions or give them the satisfactions of saying, "We told you so." One evening, Florence decided to confront him. She couldn't live like this anymore, pretending everything was fine while her heart broke a little more each day. Toby, she said, standing in the doorway of the living room where he was watching TV. Can we talk? He didn't look up. What now? This isn't working, she said, her voice trembling but determined. Whatever this is, it's not a marriage. It's not love. Why are you doing this to me? Toby finally looked at her, his face unreadable. Why? Because I can, he said coldly. Because you let me. Florence's chest tightened. She wanted to scream at him, to tell him he was wrong, but deep down, she knew he was right. She had allowed herself to be trapped, believing she could fix him or make him love her. But love wasn't something you could force, and Toby's cruelty was proof of that. She turned away, tears streaming down her face, but this time she wasn't crying out of despair. She was crying out of realization that she deserved better, that she couldn't stay in this toxic marriage, no matter what society or her family thought. One night, as she sat on her matrimonial bed, unable to sleep, her eyes were deep with worry, stress, and sadness. She heard a footstep on the hallway leading to the bedroom. Her heart froze. Flung open the door was Toby, looking at her as though he wanted to devour her. She looked scared and asked what he wanted, but Toby didn't respond. He moved closer to her, and in seconds, he ripped her nightwear apart and made the worst love making with her. When he was done, he stood up gently and left the room. Florence felt pained, heartbroken, and scared. She couldn't get up from the bed, tears streaming down her face. She had been enduring the pain for long and the constant abuse Toby gave her almost every night, but what could she do? One cold Saturday evening, Florence was in the kitchen preparing dinner when the doorbell rang. Wiping her hands on the towel, she hurried to see who it was. Opening the door, her heart sank. There stood Toby, reeking of alcohol, his arm wrapped around a stunningly beautiful woman, slim, curvaceous, and clearly intoxicated. Both of them looked wasted, their laughter echoing through the quiet night. Before Florence could react, Toby pushed past her, dragging the woman into the living room. Florence stood frozen in the doorway, her mind racing with disbelief. Regaining her composure, she followed them into the house. "Who is she?" Florence asked, her voice trembling as she pointed at the stranger. Toby turned to her, his expression smug and mocking. "What does she look like?" He sneered. "Are you blind? This gorgeous woman here is Bella, my baby, my love, my everything." His words dripped with arrogance, and he flashed a sheepish grin. Florence's shock turned into rage. "Toby, has it gotten to the point where you bring prostitutes like this into our home?" she yelled, her voice shaking with fury. "How dare you call Bella a prostitute?" Toby bellowed, his face contorted with anger. Without warning, he raised his hand and delivered a thunderous slap across Florence's face. The force of the blow sent her reeling. For a moment, she felt everything go dark as she collapsed to the floor, unconscious. When Florence awoke the next morning, she found herself lying on the same spot where she had fallen. Her head dropped, and her cheek burned from the impact. Toby hadn't even bothered to help her or check if she was alive. She struggled to her feet, her body aching, and stumbled towards the hallway. As she approached the bedroom, muffled sounds caught her attention. Romantic mourning and laughter spilled from behind the closed door of what was supposed to be their matrimonial room. Florence's knees gave way, and she sank to the floor, tears streaming down her face. Her heart shattered into pieces as she whispered, "Why, Toby? Why are you doing this to me?" She cried until her chest felt hollow, but the pain inside her refused to subside. Desperate to escape the suffocating torment, she grabbed her car keys and left the house. She drove aimlessly until she spotted a bar and pulled over. Inside, she began drinking heavily, trying to drown her sorrows with every bottle she ordered. As she sat slumped over the counter, a familiar voice called out to her, "Florence, is that you? What are you doing here?" Startled, Florence looked up and gasped. "Funsho, is this really you? What are you doing here?" "I came to wash my car down the road," Funsho explained, concern etched on his face. But I noticed you've been drinking non-stop. Florence, is everything okay? At his words, Florence broke down in tears. Unable to speak, she allowed Funsho to help her up and guide her out of the bar. He took her to his apartment where she finally opened up, recounting every pain, details of her life since her wedding night. Funsho listened in silence, his fist clenched, as his jaw tight, as he fought back his anger. You can't keep living like this, Florence, he said finally, his voice trembling with emotion. You need to report Tobby for his abuse. He has no right to treat you this way. Florence shook her head. I can't, Funsho. What will people say? What about my dad, my reputation, my job? I will figure a way out, she said, though her voice lacked conviction. Funsho sighed deeply, his anger softening into concern. Whatever you decide to do, just know you're not alone. I am here for you, Florence. Always. If you ever need me, just call me. And I mean it. Tears welled up in Florence's eyes as she nodded for the first time in months. She felt a small glimmer of hope. They hugged tightly. Florence stayed in Funsho's arm for what felt like an eternity, her body trembling with the weight of her sorrow. His presence felt comforting, like a lifeline she desperately needed. But guilt knocked at her. She had walked into this marriage of her own volition, blinded by Toby's pretense of love, and now she was trapped into a nightmare she couldn't escape from. Or so she thought. Thank you, Funsho, she whispered, pulling away slightly and looking into his eyes. You don't know what this means to me, but I don't want to drag you into this mess. You've already done enough. Funsho shook his head firmly. Florence, don't say that. No one deserves what you're going through. And if you think I'm going to stand by while it destroys you, you are wrong. Let me help you. She wiped her tears, her mind clouded with fear and uncertainty. I can't, Funsho. The shame alone would kill me. My father would be so disappointed, and everyone would laugh at me. They'd call me a failure, a woman who couldn't hold a marriage together. Funsho took her hands in his gaze intense. Listen to me, Florence. What people think doesn't matter. Your safety, your happiness, and your life are what matter. You can't let this abuse define you or keep you silent. You are stronger than this, and you deserve so much better. Florence wanted to believe him, but the walls she had built around her pain were too high. The thought of standing up to Tobby terrified her. She nodded weakly, though her heart was still riddled with doubt. When Florence returned home later that night, the house was eerily quiet. She walked through the hallway, her heart pounding with apprehension. She found Tobby sprawled on the couch, an empty bottle of whiskey by his side, snoring loudly. Bella was nowhere to be seen, and for a brief moment Florence felt a flicker of relief. She tiptoed past him to the guest room she had started sleeping in. Locking the door behind her, sitting on the bed, she clutched her phone tightly, her hands hovering over Funsho's number. His words echoing in his mind. You are stronger than this. Over the next few days, Florence began making subtle changes. She withdrew money from her joint account with Tobby and opened a secret one in her name. She started gathering documents, a birth certificate, a marriage certificate, and anything else she might need. She also began documenting Tobby's abuse, secretly recording his outbursts and taking pictures of the bruises he left behind. She didn't tell Funsho about her plan, but his words gave her courage. Slowly but surely, she was preparing to escape. One morning, as Tobby lay in bed, sleeping soundly, Florence quietly dressed for work. Their honeymoon was over, and she was eager to return to her job, a job she loved and had worked hard to build a career in. Just as she was about to step out of the bedroom, Toby's voice rang out behind her. Where do you think you're going? He asked, sitting up in bed with a cold, piercing look in his eyes. Florence turned to face him, trying to remain calm. I am going to work, Toby. I told you last night I'll be resuming today. Toby's lips curled into a mocking smirk. You are crazy. If you think you'll be returning to work, he said, pointing to the table in the center of the room. I have drafted your resignation letter. It is right there. Pick it up. Take it to your office, submit it, and then come back home. My wife doesn't work. You are a full housewife now, and that is final. Florence froze, her heart sinking. What? Toby, you can't be serious. I can't just resign like that. My job means everything to me. Please don't do this to me, she pleaded, her voice shaking. Toby's eyes darkened as he glared at her. Then try me and see how quickly your life will turn into shambles, he hissed. I said what I said, Florence. You will stay home and fulfill your duties as my wife. End of discussion. Tears welled up in Florence's eyes as she stepped closer to him, her voice trembling with emotions. Why are you doing this to me, Toby? Why are you so determined to ruin my life? Have I ever wronged you? Why are you so cruel? Say another word, Toby snapped, his voice rising with fury, and you will regret every single one of them. Florence felt the air leave her lungs as she realized there was no point in arguing further. She lowered her gaze, picking up the resignation letter from the table with trembling hands. Without another word, she turned and left the house, her chest heavy with shame and heartbreak. Florence sat in her car outside the office parking lot, gripping the resignation letter tightly in her hands. Her heart ached as she looked at the building she had worked so hard to be a part of it. It was more than a job to her. It was her identity, her independence, and her sanctuary. Yet, she was forced to abandon it, all because of Toby's insecurities and oppressive rules. She wiped her tears, took a deep breath, and walked into the office. Her colleagues greeted her warmly, excited to see her back. After her honeymoon, she forced a smile, but her heart felt heavy. When she reached her manager's office, she handed over the letter, unable to meet his eyes. Florence, are you sure about this? Her manager asked, clearly shocked. You've been one of our best employees. Is everything okay? She hesitated, wanting to tell him everything, but the fear of Toby's threat held her back. Yes, I'm sure. Thank you for everything, she said, her voice barely audible. As she walked out of the building, the weight of her decision crushed her. She couldn't go back home, not yet. Instead, she called Funsho, her voice trembling as she explained what had happened. When Florence arrived at Funsho's apartment, he immediately noticed the anguish on her face. She fell into his arms, sobbing uncontrollably. He made me quit, Funsho. He took the one thing that made me feel like myself, she cried. I don't know who I am anymore. Funsho held her tightly, his heart breaking for her. Florence, you're stronger than this. You're more than your job. And you're definitely more than what Toby tries to make you believe. You deserve to be happy, to live a life free of his control. I don't know if I can do this, she whispered. Every time I think I can stand up to him, he finds a way to crush me. You don't have to fight this battle alone, Funsho said, gently cupping her face. I am here for you, Florence. Whatever you need, whenever you need it, I am just a call away. Their eyes met, and for a moment the pain and fear melted away. In Funsho's presence, Florence felt seen, valued, and safe. Slowly, their bond reignited, and the love they once shared began to bloom again. Funsho became a confidant, a escape from the nightmare that was her marriage. Over the following weeks, Florence and Funsho spent more time together. He encouraged her to rediscover her passions, helping her rebuild the confidence Toby had stripped away. Funsho's unwavering support reminded her of the woman she used to be, strong, ambitious, and full of life. But the more time she spent with Funsho, the more guilt crept into her heart. She was still legally married to Toby, and despite his cruelty, she felt torn about the path she was walking. She knew she couldn't continue living a double life, but the thought of confronting Toby filled her with dread. One evening, as they sat together on Funsho's couch, he took her hand and said, Florence, you need to make a decision. You can't keep living like this. You deserve to be happy, but you have to choose it for yourself. Tears welled up in her eyes as she nodded. You're right. I can't keep running forever. It's time to take my life back. Florence began preparing for the next move. She secretly sought legal advice about filing for divorce, knowing it would be a difficult and messy process. She also started looking for job opportunities, determined to reclaim her independence. Her growing closeness with Funsho gave her the strength she needed to face the storm ahead. It reminded her of the love she deserved, the life she could have if she broke free from Toby's grip. As the days went by, Florence felt her resolve strengthening. She wasn't the same woman she had cried herself to sleep on her wedding night. She was ready to fight for her happiness, no matter what it took, and with Funsho by her side, she knew she wouldn't have to face the battle alone. One evening, Toby came home in a foul mood, slamming the door so hard the wall seemed to shake. Florence was in the kitchen preparing dinner when he stormed in. "Where is my dinner?" he barked, his eyes bloodshot. "It's almost ready," she replied calmly, trying to keep her voice steady. "Almost? I have been working all day, and you can't even have my food ready on time. What kind of a useless woman are you?" Florence gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles turning white. She wanted to scream at him, to tell him she wasn't a slave, but she bit her tongue. She couldn't risk provoking him. Not yet. Toby grabbed her arm roughly, spinning her around to face him. "Look at me when I'm talking to you," he growled. Her heart raced, but she met his gaze, her voice trembling. "I am sorry, Toby. It won't happen again." He scoffed and let her go, shoving her aside as he walked out of the kitchen. Florence exhausted shakily, her resolve hardening. She couldn't live like this anymore. A week later, Florence finally put her plan into action. She waited until Toby was out for the evening, likely with Bella, and packed her bags. She left behind a note, short and to the point. "This marriage is over. Don't look for me." With her bags in her hand, she slipped out of the house and drove to the address Funsho had given her. When he opened the door and saw her standing there, tears streaming down her face, he pulled her into a tight embrace. "You're safe now," he whispered. "I promise you never have to go through that pain again." For the first time in months, Florence felt a glimmer of hope. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. She was done being a victim. It was time to reclaim her life. Funsho devoted everything to Florence, ensuring she experienced the love and happiness she had long been denied. He provided for her every need, showering her with care, gifts, and the best life had to offer. Funsho's modeling company had grown into a global empire with branches in Nigeria, Dubai, and Singapore, and his success enabled them to travel abroad frequently for vacations. Their bond reignited, and their love flourished like never before. Meanwhile, Toby searched relentlessly for Florence. After months of no success, he went to her family's home to report her disappearance. Her parents were equally worried and assured him they would contact him immediately if they heard anything. Toby left, sitting with anger and desperation. When he returned home, he began drinking heavily, his rage boiling over. "How dare that woman leave my house?" he shouted, throwing an empty bottle against the wall, shattering it into pieces. "She was supposed to suffer, to pay for what her father did to mine. Chief Adetola ruined my father 15 years ago, forcing him to sell his company over a debt. My father died of heartbreak, and I swore I would make them pay. That little bitch will pay, every penny." Florence, on the other hand, was thriving with Funsho. Their relationship deepened and they decided to start a family together. One day, Florence called her mother, who was overwhelmed with relief to hear from her. Florence tearfully recounted the abuse she endured at Toby's hand, explained that she had stayed silent out of fear for her life. Her mother broke down in tears, apologizing for not noticing the signs and urging Florence to come home. Weeks later, Funsho decided it was time to formally visit Florence's family. He was a successful man now, and he wanted them to know their daughter was in safe hands. They planned a weekend visit, and when they arrived at Chief Adetola's home, the reunion was emotional. However, unbeknownst to Florence, her father texted Toby, informing him that Florence was at their house. Toby arrived in a fury, barging into the living room where everyone was gathered. As soon as Florence saw him, she stood up in anger. "What are you doing here?" she demanded. Instead of answering, Toby pulled out a gun, silencing the room. "Come here, Florence," he ordered, pointing the weapon at her. Trembling with fear, she reluctantly obeyed, while her parent pleaded for her release. "Stay back," Toby warned, his voice filled with venom. "You all think you can take what's mine? I will show you what happens when you cross me." Funsho, enraged, stepped forward. "Let her go." "Toby, you've done enough damage." Toby swung the gun towards Funsho. "Stay out of this, or I will hand you first." As tension filled the room, Chief Akitola lunged at Toby in an attempt to disarm him. In the chaos, the gun fired. The bullet struck Chief Adetola and he collapsed to the floor. Blood pooled around him as screams erupted from the family. Funsho tackled Toby to the ground, disarming him and rendering him unconscious before calling the police. Paramedics arrived shortly after, but it was too late for Chief Adetola. He was pronounced dead on the scene. Toby was arrested and taken into custody, leaving the family devastated. The court hearing was swift and decisive. Florence testified about the abuse he endured during a marriage to Toby, presenting evidence of his cruelty and threat. A testimony combined with the tragic events at a family home sealed Toby's fate. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with hard labor. Months later, Chief Adetola was laid to rest in an emotional ceremony. The loss weighed heavily on the family, but Florence found solace in Funsho's unwavering support. A week after the burial, Florence and Funsho decided to leave Nigeria behind. They relocated abroad, determined to start a new chapter filled with hope, love, and healing. Florence vowed to honor her father's memory by building a life free from pain, embracing the happiness she finally found with Funsho. The end. Hey lovelies, how are you doing? Thank you for watching the last episode of the story. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you enjoyed the story, I'm very sure you will enjoy some of my other stories. Please do share, like, subscribe, and don't forget to comment so I will know how to improve and serve you guys better. Till my next story, you guys should remain blessed. I love you.